Hello.
Hey, how you guys?
All right, how are you? Good.
Hey, had a good time.
Hi, man.
Hi, hon.
Hey, how's it going?
What's going on there?
Oh, not much. Yeah, that'll be nice.
You did stop the recording, right? Oh, here I.
Oh, no, it's recording.
Welcome, everybody. Good to see everyone's faces. Hope you're having a great week. We are in the book of Daniel. We're going to pick up in Daniel 5, where we left off last week. Last week we looked at Daniel 4, particularly, well, 3 and 4, I guess. What was 4 about? What did you see in Daniel 4? What did we talk about?
Nebuchadnezzar's dream.
Okay. And Nebuchadnezzar's dream of this great tree that is cut off, and there's this the stump is left, and the stump is going to have to uh, endure through the rain and the elements. And what did the dream represent? Well, what happened to Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4?
He, I suppose, had a psychotic episode or something, and he, went out and, started, eating grass like a cow.
7 years, right? He lost he was given the mind of an animal, the text talks about, and he lived away from people and was little more than a beast of the field, and then his mind came back to him. Why did his mind come back to him? How did he recover from all this? He had great psychiatrists. He had medical therapy. How did he recover?
Sounds like he prayed.
You repented, yeah.
And he acknowledged God, right? He acknowledged that God was supreme. Now, all of it came about, of course, because of the day that he walked out on the palace balcony or whatever and looked out over Babylon and said, "Man, did I do well? Look at me. I'm doing really well here as king of this great city and this great empire." And that was when he was taken down. The implication, God took him down, and the dream warned him, and so he spent this time. So that's important. And the way these chapters work in Daniel is one story sort of flows into another. So I want you to sort of keep that in your mind as we get into chapter 5. And as we read about another king, some years removed from Nebuchadnezzar, probably nearly 30 years removed from Nebuchadnezzar, is when this next event occurs in chapter 5. And another king who maybe forgot these laws, these teachings that Nebuchadnezzar was reminded of so strongly. So we start in chapter 5, verse 1, with King Belshazzar. Now, I should pause just a minute. For a long time, nobody thought Belshazzar was a historical person. People sort of thought he was kind of made up for the story. There was not a King Belshazzar that anybody knew about. And so there was this sort of assumption. Nabonidus was the last king of Babylon. It was Nabonidus who lost the empire when Cyrus the Great and his armies came in. And so it was, people just sort of assumed that Belshazzar was made up. Well, lo and behold, some documents came to light in which we find that Nabonidus had a son named Belshazzar. And not only that, Nabonidus spent a lot of time for the last decade of his reign out of Babylon and other places, sort of in semi-retirement, leaving Belshazzar to basically be the king. So that's kind of what you have in Daniel chapter 5. You have King Belshazzar, who's ruling as co-regent maybe for his father, or vice king. I don't know how it worked exactly, but he's the king for all practical purposes in Babylon. And he has a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. We see that in Esther too, the big banquet. Apparently the Persian kings were known for these lavish banquets, and these lavish, some of the Greek historians write about that. So this is kind of right in character with the Persian Achaemenid Empire. And so you have this great banquet with for 1,000. Have you ever been to a party with 1,000 people? I never have. I don't go to the right parties, apparently. I've never been to a party with 1,000 people, but a party with 1,000 people, and he's drinking with them. They mention a couple of times drinking wine, which might figure in this, and gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. Nebuchadnezzar was not his father. Maybe not even a blood relative, but sort of a way of referring to a previous king, Nebuchadnezzar, his father. And so they use these goblets, these articles that were in the temple in Jerusalem to drink their wine from. It's not stated that this was intentional, but it seems like it was. Some folks have suggested that maybe it was a way of recounting the victories of the Babylonian Empire. You can sort of date this pretty firmly, and we find out it's the last evening that the Babylonian Empire exists. And at the time, the Persians are moving in. There's a couple of cities north of Babylon that have been taken, and so there's got to be some unease in Babylon. So maybe this party is a way of celebrating Babylon's historic power and the way Babylon's gods have allowed them to overcome other nations in their view. And it says they're drinking from these wine, these goblets that have been taken from Jerusalem, and praise the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. By the way, does gold, silver, bronze, and iron sound familiar?
That was that huge statue that Nebuchadnezzar got in his dream that got knocked down.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's intentional. I think there's the intent of evoking that memory, right? These other kingdoms that are going to fall. So as this is happening, suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared on and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. Somebody read starting in verse 6 there. My Bible app is messed up. Somebody pick up verse 6.
His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were numb. The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple, and have a gold chain placed around his neck. He will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom."
All right, you can pause there. Maybe third highest, by the way, because Belshazzar is the second highest. That's a thought anyway. So it's the stage is set like it's been set before a couple of times, right? Let's tell you a dream, and let's bring in the astrologers and the diviners and let them interpret it. But of course, they can't do it as we've grown accustomed to. And King Belshazzar became even more terrified. He doesn't know what's going on. But the queen, the text says, whether it's his wife or maybe his mother, somebody who knows a little history, talks about King Nebuchadnezzar appointing this person chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he'll tell you what the writing means. So Daniel was brought in before the king. Verse 14, I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. And tells him, he'll be rewarded if he can interpret. So verse 17 then. Then Daniel answered the king, you may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I'll read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. Your Majesty, the Most High God, gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. It's interesting, isn't it, that Daniel acknowledges the power of Nebuchadnezzar, the power of this great king, but also says God gave him this power. So Daniel's under no illusions as to who's really in charge, right? Who's really king. And everything Nebuchadnezzar has, Daniel said, came because of God. And because of that, he had this great power. Verse 20, when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and sets over them anyone he wishes. This is real important. God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth. Daniel has believed that all this time. As we get into chapter 7 and 8 and 9, you're going to see visions that reinforce this idea that God is sovereign over all the kingdoms of the earth, places over them anyone he wishes. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. Talks about having the goblets from the temple, God's temple, brought, and everybody gets to drink wine from them, and praising the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which you cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. And therefore he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. So you get the connection to chapter 4, right? There's Daniel refers to this event to say, you should have learned this lesson and you didn't. So what's happening is similar to what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. It's just going to be worse for Belshazzar in a lot of ways, at least. So what was the inscription? Anybody have comments, by the way, at this point? I'm talking a lot.
Well,
I like
people in power never seem to learn the lessons they should, do they?
I'm sorry, what was that, Josh?
People in power never seem to learn the lessons they should, do they? They make the same mistakes over and over again. This rings very true to me that Belshazzar would not be a student of history, that he wouldn't, know what to do from the past. He wouldn't know Daniel. He wouldn't think to seek him out. He wouldn't honor God.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising at all, is it? And you're right. This is something that seems to happen. Either the kind of people who get power, the kind of people who forget that anyway, or when they get the power, they forget it. It causes them to forget it. They become very prideful, and they look at what they've accomplished, and especially in Daniel's time, when being king was, pretty much a, something handed down. It's not like you actually worked all that hard for it. But yeah, there's this idea that I did this, I accomplished these things, and it's not just people in power. We can all sort of fall victim to that, but I think it is much more, people in power are much more prone to it, perhaps. And not learning from history, not looking back and seeing what's happened before and saying, maybe there's something here to learn. Okay, so
before you move on, Patrick, I was thinking, I like verse 17 and 18, the whole notion that Daniel stays very focused about who God is and his sovereignty, how it does, is supreme over this king. And yet he could still give honor, like you're saying, to this king. And it would be easy in a very secular way if someone thinks they have power to kind of just give them the power. But Daniel doesn't do that. He acknowledges he's saying there's someone greater than you.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that he doesn't play the game. He's not like, oh yeah, I'd like to have that third highest, position in the kingdom. You keep your rewards, I don't need that. Give that to somebody else. But
Yeah.
sure, I'll tell you what it says because
I'll
you
use
need-
my talents that are from God to
Yeah,
be able
yeah.
to tell you about what's written on the wall. I thought that was
He
challenging.
yeah, he demonstrates this sort of detachment. I mean, he's worked for the Babylonians now for a lot of years, right? From the time he was a young man into his old age, he's worked for the Babylonians, but he's never apparently been absorbed into the power games and into the ways that it works. Colette, I think you're muted.
There we
Colette, I
are.
can't.
Yeah.
Oh,
I say this a lot to some of the clients that I work with who deals with a lack of confidence and feeling very competent, but yet lacking confidence. And we get to the point of talking about what's true. And that's what I love about Daniel. You see this confidence that he can stand up against power. And really it comes from, I believe, his confidence in who God is, the truth about who really, really, really is powerful. And that allows you to have this confidence about you that you don't really it's versus I don't really care, who cares? It's not that kind of confidence, right? It's a confidence that he can still show respect and he can still be polite and they don't have to curse him out or whatever the case is. And when he's not in front of the king, it'll be the same ugly power with his peers. That's not the case. It allows him to be the same across the board and speak truth through power, which is beautiful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Michael just shared a Rembrandt's painting of this event. If you want to take a look at it, it's a well-known painting, but it's very cool. I like it. So yeah. So and the he's not afraid to call Belshazzar down for what he's his arrogance. Yeah. It's not just that you don't believe in the God of Israel that gave you all this power. It's that you're mocking him in a sense. I mean, that's why yeah, thanks. That's why there's this using of the temple vessels. He's not just disbelieving in God. He's actually mocking him. This is these vessels that were in his temple are now in my possession, and we can all drink wine out of them. So yeah, so verse 25, then this is the inscription that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, parsin. I don't know how you actually pronounce that. It's Aramaic. I don't know how you pronounce it, but there you go. Here's what the words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. All of these words, by the way, are words for measures, and the verb form can be used for measuring something. So it works both ways. Probably it's intended both ways. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Peres, which is the plural of parsin. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. So what's the message that the hand writes, essentially? Sum it up for us. It's all over. That's a very succinct summation. What's that? Your toast. Yeah, it's there's yeah. Your kingdom is wanting, and because of that, this God who places over kingdoms who he wants has given this kingdom of yours to the Medes and Persians, and your time as ruler is over. Medes and Persians, by the way, the Persians we know about. The Medes and Persians both came from the same area of the world, Iran. What we know as Iran. They were tribal people originally. Both kind of created kingdoms, and eventually they would clash sometimes. And there's actually a lot of debate among historians whether the Persians conquered the Medes or whether there was sort of a confederacy and the Medes just sort of blended in. There's lots of different ways to take the history. But in any case, it's a union of these two peoples that becomes the most powerful empire in the world for many for a century or so, I guess, or a little over. And the prophecy or the message is they're going to take your kingdom. So Daniel is given his purple and a gold chain is placed around his neck, and he's proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. But it just goes to show you that power doesn't last, because that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. That very night, right? God didn't waste. There's no time. It's interesting. It's the same with Nebuchadnezzar, right? He does get the warning of a year, but you know, there's this instant, it seems like a moment where he passes the tipping point and God punishes him. And so that's what happens here. And there's this complete change of rulers. The Babylonian or the Persian armies, according to most historians, came into Babylon without a fight. There was not even a battle. They walked in and took over. And actually, there's a lot of propaganda that was published by the Persians in the early days that sort of pictures Nabonidus and Belshazzar as apostates who were ignoring the worship of the gods, and the Persians and Medes came in and fixed that, and so they sort of painted themselves, as you do, as the heroes. We need to talk about Darius the Mede for a minute. Honestly, we're not sure who Darius the Mede is. Now, it may be a Belshazzar situation. It may be one of these days we come up with a document that explains all of this really well. But for the moment, we don't really know exactly who Darius the Mede is. There are all kinds of possibilities is a strong word. There are all kinds of guesses as to who he might be, from a general that Cyrus the Great, who was the king in Persia at the time, a general who kind of led the armies into Babylon, and Cyrus sort of gave him the throne of Babylon, particularly for a while. There are a couple of possibilities of Median kings or their sons who perhaps were the person indicated by Darius the Mede. There's no one that we know named Darius who fits this particular time frame that we're aware of. There's a Darius the Great who was Persian king about another 50 years or so from this, but this is too early for him. So nobody's just very sure who Darius the Mede is. And you can go, actually, if you Wikipedia Darius the Mede, there's all kinds of interesting stuff about him. Some people, some scholars or people who perhaps don't have a view of the Bible that would want it to be more literal. Some scholars would say that Daniel just sort of creates this character from a conglomeration of others. Of course, again, they said that about Belshazzar. So I don't know the answer. I just thought you should know that there is some question about who this Darius the Mede actually is. We'll see him again in the very next verse, and we'll see him again in chapter. So that has something here. That's the governor that Cyrus put in charge, Gubaru, or there's a couple of different names he goes by. There's a lot of there's about 6 or 7 guesses that range from not very likely to could be, I guess, but we just don't know. We just don't know how. We just don't have the data to really determine that. But just so you know, we don't really know who this Darius is, so we're in a little bit of uncharted territory there. So comments or questions about chapter 5? Handwriting on the wall. If you've ever heard that phrase, I guess this is where it comes from.
Linda, I think you're muted. Linda, I think you're muted.
Oh, I'm
No,
sorry.
not muted. I'm sorry. Oh, I thought you were speaking. Hey, what I was wondering is, when Daniel said he didn't want the gold and anything, why would he still give him this?
I don't know. Maybe Daniel was just being polite. But I mean, I guess if the king wants to give a reward, the king gives a reward. You know, even if you don't
And it's polite
care
to take.
what you're going to
Yeah,
do with it.
yeah,
Uh,
I guess he
He
would
didn't.
say,
He
"Never
certainly
mind."
didn't get to be third highest in the kingdom for very long, did he?
No,
You-
no, things switched.
Yeah.
And it also appears to me, what I was thinking is that he didn't really believe the interpretation.
Yeah.
You know, and they
Yeah.
probably said, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's no evidence of repentance, right? There's no evidence. Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It appears that way. I don't know.
But it's interesting, isn't it, that even though Daniel's interpretation is not particularly encouraging or hopeful, he doesn't respond like a lot of kings and have him put to death or thrown in prison or something. All right, so verse 1 then of chapter 6. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps. That's a Persian loan word that appears quite often in the book of Daniel and well, some other places too in Scripture, but particularly the book of Daniel. So it talks about Darius's administration, right? This is the way he's going to govern. So he has these 120 governors, call them provincial governors, maybe, to rule throughout the kingdom with 3 administrators over them. So you got 120 governors with 3 chiefs of staff, maybe you'd call them, or CEOs, I don't know. One of whom was Daniel. So Daniel actually does maintain a pretty high place in the kingdom, even though there's a change in administration. The satraps are made accountable to them so the king might not suffer loss. Now, Daniel so distinguished himself by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. So apparently, Darius has these ambitions or these intentions to create a new position, I suppose, in which Daniel is the one everybody reports to, which is obviously a pretty powerful position. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. Well, they don't want to stand for this, right? Daniel's power cuts into their own. And so they decide, well, let's dig in and let's find some skeletons in his closet. If you've ever seen Hamilton, there you go. That's what happens to Alexander, right? They dig in and find the skeletons in the closet and pull them out, and his career as a politician is pretty much finished. But they can't find anything like that in Daniel. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, may King Darius live forever. We have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. See what they've done, right? They've created this situation that Daniel can't possibly weasel out of, because they basically made his faith illegal, or they've had the king do it. Now, the king has issued this decree to make Daniel's faith in God illegal. you can't pray to anybody. You can't pray to anybody but the king. That's, I mean, talk about, you're really trying to play the king, right? Oh, king, you're so great. Nobody should have to pray to anybody but you. So for the next 30 days, let's make it illegal to pray to anybody but you, which is, of course, ridiculous on its face. But Darius, for whatever reason, probably because he believed it to some degree, is agrees to it and puts the decree in writing. Now, when Daniel learned that I can't say that word tonight, that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. All right, let's pause just a second. If this was you, what would you do? Jesus said, go to your closet and pray, right? He said, don't let anybody know. I would have just followed Jesus' teaching and gone and hidden somewhere, and nobody would have been the wiser, right? So why does Daniel do this? There are a lot of reasons. I don't know the answer, but why does Daniel do it this way?
The window's open toward Jerusalem. I think you wanted to look in that direction.
The window's open toward Jerusalem. Muslims today pray facing Mecca, right? Turning toward Jerusalem, the remembrance of who we are and what our history is, and God's history to us, and the temple that used to be there, and we still pray. So perhaps it's even a custom that's developed in captivity of praying toward Jerusalem. Certainly it's something Daniel is used to do. I think Daniel just decided, look, I've been doing this a long time. I'm not going to change. Remember the food in chapter 1 that we talked about, where, I mean, it's unclear that the food particularly was problematic, but Daniel makes a decision, right, not to do that. Later on, we see Daniel does eat the food from the king's table. So, but Daniel at some point just decides, you know what? This is what I've always done. I've been doing this a long time. I've been praying to God a long time. And I'm going to change. I'm not going to do it differently just because these guys are trying to get me.
Kind of differently, actually, based on verse 11. They found Daniel praying and asking God for help.
Yeah, right.
He prayed specifically because of this edict.
Yep.
And he felt, this wasn't just a daily prayer for him. He wasn't just, it says as he usually does, but I think he went home to pray specifically because of this decree. Yep. And he needed to speak to God. He needed to be with God to ask for strength and to ask for help.
And maybe the feeling is, if you're praying to God about a persecution or about your people using your identity as a person of faith against you, then maybe Daniel's thought was, I don't want to do that in secret. I want to ask God for help in this situation, quietly in a corner somewhere. I want to be, open about it.
He had the necessary.
Yeah. Obviously, he had the faith that.
From the firefights.
Yeah, right. It's very similar. This is a very similar story. It echoes the furnace that this stand has to be made, and we're going to make it, and we're not having qualms about it. There are times where you do that, and I don't think anybody else can tell you what you should do in those moments. I think it's just when you need to, when God shows you or tells you, or you're convicted that you need to make a stand of some sort, you got to do it, and you just gotta be willing to accept what comes because of that. And Daniel apparently has never been shy, right, about speaking about his faith in God in public situations.
Well, I
And,
think it's interesting too, that the decree was a 30-day decree. This wasn't a final decree.
right,
Can wait.
Just.
They should have took the king off as something fishy was going. It's 30 days.
Right, yeah, again, that's a weird decree, but yeah, but.
yeah, oh, yeah, it's,
Quite a lot of conviction to pray 3 times a day and be open.
it's probably 30 days because in 30 days, most of the kingdom's never going to hear about it, right? Or when they do hear about it, it's going to be over. So it's not going to cause a lot of stir if it's over in 30 days, but that's going to be enough time to catch Daniel.
Yeah,
And
I think it
again,
was directed at Daniel.
was that
It was directed at Daniel.
right? And that's 30 days is going to be plenty of time. And again, I got to admit, 30 days, I'd probably say, I'm just going to be quiet and wait 30 days and it'll be over. I mean, honestly, but that's not what Daniel does. So they go to the king. Hey, didn't you just publish a decree? And he's like, of course, I did.
Getting muted.
I'm sorry.
No, I keep getting muted for whatever reason, because I've been making responses and
Oh, please respond. I'm sorry.
that's okay. I was just saying that Daniel trusted God with his life.
Yep. Yeah. He has a lot of faith, a lot of trust, a lot of courage to put his life in God's hands and trust that it's safe.
Yeah.
So they go to the king. Daniel, who's one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Again, we see the kings, this is a theme in Daniel, right? The king is, well disposed toward Daniel in all these circumstances. And Daniel never seems to run into conflicts with the king, particularly. It's these other administrators that are giving him a problem. And they go to Darius and they say, there's nothing you can do. The edict can't be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." Sounds a little like, again, reminds you of the three guys in chapter 3 who, whether he saves us or not, we know he can, but whether he does or not, we're not going to worship your gods. So a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating, without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. That's a tough night for a king, right? He's not going to eat. He doesn't eat, and he has no entertainment. Awfully tough night. Yeah, poor guy, poor king. But you can see he's worried about this. At first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. And when he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Now, I don't know exactly why things change after the night goes by, because the seal was supposed to say, you can't change the situation. So I presumably Daniel would have to be left in there, but for whatever reason, the decision is made probably because the lions haven't done anything, Daniel can come out. And maybe because of the innocence, right? That he's innocent. Maybe the gods have decreed that he's innocent, and we're going to bring him out. I don't know the answer to that question. The text doesn't really give it. The story doesn't give it. It's just this is what happens.
The decree
So-
said he had to be thrown into the lion's den. It doesn't, it just kind of assumes the lions will kill him. Maybe that's the issue here. Maybe the king's exercising a bit of a loophole.
Right, right. Yeah, the edict does say thrown into the lion's den, which again, and with the seals on there, it leads me to think he's just got to stay there. But apparently that's not the way it goes, and not the way it works. So, and he's pulled out, and without a wound on him, the angel has come and shut the mouths of the lions. Be interesting to spend the night in the lion's den. About when you decided they weren't going to eat you. Then it'd be kind of interesting to spend the time with the lions, but kind of scary until then.
Would you sleep?
I don't know. I think it'd be hard to trust them, wouldn't it? And again, and I want you to hear again this has your servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions. This is the reputation Daniel has. He's a follower, a worshiper of a God who's alive, who does things, who makes a difference in the world and in the lives of his people and through his people. He's a God who is living, and a God who's powerful, and a God who's active. And Daniel is known as a person who serves him continually. It's just his lifestyle. That's who he is. And he's able to do that without antagonizing and without creating situations that are negative. He's able to serve God continually while also, now that doesn't always work, obviously, with the administrators here, but I find encouragement in the notion that in secular circumstances, people can be servants of God, and people can serve him and be known as servants of his. And it doesn't have to always be a standoff, right? It doesn't have to always be a fight. Sometimes it's going to be, and when it is, then you need to be aware of that, and you need to take that, and you need to accept it. But it doesn't always have to be, and maybe sometimes we make it a fight when it doesn't need to be a fight, and we need to be more aware of that, more circumspect about how sometimes we conduct ourselves with people. And then verse 24. This is ancient Near Eastern king overreaction 101. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. As a kid, I never had I never shed any tears about the bad guys getting thrown in the lion's den at the end. But I was probably an adult before I realized it's the wives and kids too. And suddenly the whole story kind of takes on a whole different tone for me.
Flannel graphs didn't cover it.
The flannel graphs in Sunday school didn't have little kids and wives being thrown in the lion's den too. Before the lions reached the floor of the dens, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Graphic enough for you. I think to show, this was a specific thing done for Daniel, and the lions were still lions. I leave that with you. I don't think God sanctioned the murder of their wives and children. I think it's something that King Darius did, because that's kind of the thing ancient Near Eastern kings do. If you insult the king, he's gonna basically, go scorched earth with you, and not only you, but your family and your future descendants are going to be removed from the equation. And not just ancient Eastern kings do that all the time.
Patrick,
Yes.
the king arrested those men that came to him. But what I don't understand is, I mean, Daniel did pray, and they did see him praying. So it's
Mhm.
not like it was a lie.
Yeah, kings can do what they want, right? And I guess I sort of take it that Darius is insulted when he realizes he's been played. That these guys, out of jealousy for Daniel, have tried to enlist him and manipulate him to do their dirty work.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so it's an anger kind of response, it feels like to me. Just
Mhm.
going nuclear because there's nobody that can tell him no. Probably the only guys that could have told him no were these guys anyway. And they've kind of burned their bridges.
I
I
can't
kind of like to think Daniel at some point said, "Oh no, don't do that," but we don't know even that he did that.
I can't remember that other king. Whenever someone came to him and wanted him to do something, he would do it. It's like
Xerxes and Esther, yeah,
he didn't
uh,
even think about it.
yeah.
And Darius seems the same way.
Yeah,
There's
Xerxes in the Xerxes would have been king a few years later, but yeah, he was Persian as well. So yeah, I don't know if it was just I think the king has been his ego has been used to sort of manipulate him into this circumstance, and now he's kind of mad about it.
yeah, okay.
I'm sure the king felt sorry for Daniel. He had a
Yeah.
little relationship with him and that.
Yeah.
But I think on all our Bibles, chapter 6 is entitled Daniel and the Lion's Den, right? 6 Bibles, it was a better title would be The Lions in Daniel's Den, because God turned the tables around, be around in Daniel's favor. So if I were the editor, I'd change it. End of the Bible.
There's a story of a Japanese man who went into the zoo and jumped into the lion's den and yelled out, "Jesus save me." Well, he didn't die, but he got bit up.
Yeah. There's, do not test the Lord your God comes to mind, right? In a situation like that. I'd like to think I have faith. I don't believe I would jump into a lion's den and then ask God to save me.
Yeah, Daniel didn't choose to go in.
Right. Yeah. So what's left in chapter 6 then is the decree, the new decree that Darius writes. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? The first decree is don't pray to anybody but me. But now Darius has had a change of heart. And he writes a new decree to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So the new decree is almost exactly opposite of what the administrators got him to write before, in which everybody is supposed to fear and reverence the God of Daniel. I don't know if either of those words necessarily implies worship. That would be interesting to look for, and I didn't. I mean,
Seems odd to decree an emotion.
yeah, I mean, it's not just the emotion, right? It's revere and fear in this circumstance has to do with acknowledge this God's power, right? This is not a God to be trifled with, and to act accordingly. And yes, the words at least revere does sometimes at least include ideas of worship. So is everybody in the kingdom supposed to worship God or acknowledge him or revere him? Or I don't know the answer to that exactly, but it's still a wide-ranging decree saying Daniel's God is the living God, and his kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. Keep that in mind for chapter 7 next week. Comments or thoughts for the next couple of minutes?
What do you think was the consequence for people who didn't revere Daniel's God? Was it the
I don't
lions again?
know. There is no consequence given, which leads me to think, I wonder if it's more a sort of ceremonial proclamation, like sometimes government does today, that we acknowledge, we proclaim this, Robert Odom Day, or, just sort of a way of sort of acknowledging officially this God and Daniel and what's happened.
Yeah, because I think, with our modern sensibilities, we can acknowledge that if it's bad to make a decree saying that you could be put to death for worshiping God, we can also say it's bad for there to be a decree that you could be put to death for not worshiping God. So, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
I think most people would agree with that in a country that's founded on freedom of religion.
Yeah.
It doesn't say anything about worshiping God as the only God.
Right.
That, I think maybe this just adds Daniel's God to their pantheon of gods, which they already have, so he's just adding another one in there. So I don't know how significant it would be that, he makes this decree, but he's just acknowledging that this God has power.
Yeah. Right. And every Babylonian would have acknowledged numerous gods, even if they worship specific ones primarily, or a specific one primarily. They would have have acknowledged numerous gods. And so it's probably no big stretch for most of the Babylonian citizenry to acknowledge another god. I think the more significant thing is how he is described as a God who rescues and saves and performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He's rescued Daniel. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He endures forever. That's kind of remarkable, I think. And again, that's really what Daniel is about. That God's kingdom. How do we as God's people, in circumstances that aren't always conducive to faith and worship, how do we continue to acknowledge that God's kingdom never ends and that he endures forever and that he's sovereign, he's in control? How do we do that? And that's kind of what Daniel does for us. Chapters 7 through 12 take a very different turn, and they go from these fun little Sunday school lessons to these strange visions, much like Revelation, they feel like in a lot of places, and for much the same reason. What chapters 1 through 6 have told us in story form over and over again, chapters 7 through 12 are going to tell us in vision form, and so that's what we'll turn our attention to starting next week. So read chapter 7, chapter 8 if you can, definitely chapter 7, and we'll have some stuff to say about that next week.
Okay. Good
Good to see
night.
everyone.